Self to the end zone. Caught. Touchdown.
WAC Nation and FCS Nation, welcome to Straight Outta WAC Pigskin Football Podcast. My name is Dustin Helton, and if you've watched these previous weeks, you'll notice something new this week. I'm not alone. Kyle has made it, finally. We know real life gets in the way, because this isn't our day job, but Kyle is here, and I am so happy to have Kyle here. Personally, I think Kyle just wanted to see what the podcast looked like for the first 2 weeks where he committed to joining me. He probably still made a bad choice, but Kyle, my man, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell the folks listening and watching about yourself?
Just follow WAC Hoops Digest. You'll know all you need to know about me on Twitter. I'd like to spark some debates between fan bases. New Mexico State, Grand Canyon, for instance. But yeah, no, I am excited. I've been checking out games periodically on the new WAC football. Saw the fourth quarter of the SFA Sam Houston game. Dustin is still mad at me because of the intro video that you just saw and me putting that play that won the game for Sam Houston as the last video clip that you see in that intro video. I apologize to the SFA faithful, but that's kind of why I put the SFA play at the beginning of the clip. So, yeah, I've been following WAC Hoops. I started WAC Hoops Digest 2 years ago. Realized when I had a fan site for Utah Valley, because I graduated from there, that my power rankings articles that I would put out got a lot of attention from other fan bases. Nobody really covered the WAC as a whole at that time, and it was good basketball. So I decided to start WACHoopsDigest.com. We're in the process of rebranding, which we're going to be adding this podcast as well, along with it. Check it out. We're going to be releasing it before WAC Media Day next week. WAC Basketball Media Day is next week. The change in the branding, so we're excited about that. And Dustin, I'm glad that we got connected on this. I know you had this idea to start this podcast about WAC football, and it's made me pay attention a little bit more. I'm not as well versed right now as you are, but I'm excited about it. I think it's gonna be a great thing, and the WAC deserves it. We had another episode with Commissioner Jeff Hurd, and hopefully people check that out. It was great stuff. But I mean, it's great to see the WAC not on life support anymore, and I'm excited about where it's going.
110% agree with you. I said it whenever we first found out we were joining the WAC as an SFA alum. Excited to be part of this brand, excited to be part of this conference. And yes, we record 2 shows a night. Previous to this, we recorded a show with Commissioner Jeff Hurd. That's going to be released this week. I hope you guys check it out because it's a great interview, a great discussion. It went a different way than I thought it was going to in terms of what we talked about. And it was such a great guy to have. I
hope that was a good thing, Dustin. I hope
it's a great thing. Great thing. And I'm not lying. He can come on this podcast anytime he wants and hang out with us because he's just that cool of a dude. Always got to shout out the hat that he sent me because I harassed him about it and he managed to find a WAC hat for me. So great guy. I guess you want to go into the games. We can talk about what happened last week in week 5 across the WAC.
Let's just say it was a bad week for the WAC. That's all I'm gonna say. Watching the scores, looking at them. I mean, the only reason the WAC got a win was because Sam Houston played Lamar, so somebody from the WAC had to win that game. But yeah, it was rough. I mean, you were talking about it before that Dixie State hung with Montana for a little bit there, and the problem is Dixie State has no offense. Like we talked about recording here, 7 of the points that they scored against Montana came off a strip sack fumble, which was in the video clip that people saw. So there's no offense with the Trailblazers right now. They're averaging 11.7 points per game, what I calculated. So that's tough. But as an SFA fan, you're probably not happy that the Lumberjacks lost at Jacksonville State. Especially 1 week after almost knocking off the number 1 team in the nation in Sam Houston.
Yeah, so if we look at that game, it was 28-24, I think was the final for that one. And it was just a heartbreaker. For the second week in a row, SFA could not close out in the fourth quarter. They had a lead. They gave it away. Of course, different from Battle of Piney Woods a week before, Jacksonville State went up early 14-0 on a fumble that was returned for a touchdown, and then a very uncharacteristic trace-off interception that was ran back. And then I do believe Zarek Cooper ran in. I think he ran that touchdown in to get him up 14-0. 21-7 as Jacksonville State had a halftime lead, and then SFA came back in the fourth quarter, took the lead 24-21 on a Chris Campos field goal. I think we'll talk about Campos some, but he has not missed an extra point this season. Extremely accurate kicker.
I like the Cincinnati Bengals and the Green Bay Packers today. That was awful. I'm just going to point that out. So,
yeah, but I mean, when you look at the stats, I mean, Trey Sulliff had a good passing game. He threw for 305 yards, 2 touchdowns. For Jacksonville State, after Jacksonville State had scored, Zarek Cooper had a touchdown on the ground and in the air. So rough for SFA fans. It's really rough as we look at their playoff implications for the rest of the year. It's something we'll talk about later as we go through the AQ7, but not just as an SFA fan, not one we want to talk about. Thankfully, SFA has a bye this week before they take on Dixie State on the 23rd. Another really interesting game, and I guess it really wasn't, but you talked about being the only win because it had to be. But Sam Houston 41, Lamar 7. Kyle, I don't know if you saw any of that game, but Sam actually held Lamar's offense to only 154 yards of total offense.
It was pretty bad. Like that, you talk about dominating a football game, like that was like video game type domination in regards to that game. I guess the thing when I think about a game that like that where you're dominating and you're like, is that fun or is it just kind of like, I don't know. It's hard because I don't know. It's hard to watch.
No, I'll clear that up for you. It's fun. It's fun.
It's fun if you're on the winning side. Right? Let's put it that way. But yeah, I was impressed, and we'll get to it. You put out a tweet this week that we'll get to that I'm going to use this as part of my argument. So we'll get to that later. But I want to say something about SFA football. I hope in the bye week they go down to like a 2-minute stretch where they do 2-minute drills, because the last 2 weeks they've lost in the last 2 minutes of ball games. So it's always interesting to me how that works out, like where a team can't get off the field on 3rd down, or there's a 4th down conversion, or it hurts. I mean, like the last drive that Jacksonville State had, it was 11 plays. I mean, you got to get off the field on 3rd down, or get off the field at some point. So SFA is not the only team to struggle with it. Let's be real, but like that's an interesting dynamic in college football where teams really struggle to get off the field in key moments too, not just like in the middle of a game, but in key moments like that. And if I remember right, against Sam Houston, there was a big 3rd or 4th down play on that final drive that they couldn't get a stop on that would have won the game for the Lumberjacks, right?
Oh, they got called for a face mask.
That's right.
Gave them, yeah. But when you talk about the SFA team some, and we'll go back to Sam's nomination of Lamar in a second. Sam fans who are listening, and I don't want to be called a hater for getting off of the Sam game already. But when you look at SFA over the years, since when Colby Carthel took over, 2019, 3 wins. They would have gotten blown out by Jacksonville State. It would have. I mean, they hung in with Sam that year at the Battle of Piney Woods, but it was still a double-digit victory for Sam. 2020, obviously, they didn't get to play each other because of COVID, but SFA still went 6-4. Granted, 4 of their wins were against Division II foes, and they got wins against Abilene Christian and Eastern Kentucky. But they also hung in on their FBS games for especially against like UTEP, they hung in. SMU, they hung in some. If you look at the team and how they've improved, they're on the cusp of being something great, but not being able to play the full 60 minutes, giving up drives in the fourth quarter like this. That's the thing that's holding them back from being great. And that's the thing that I think that, when during the bye week, as they get through the rest of the year, as they go through the spring, they have the talent to win. They have the defense to win. They've had back-to-back years of top 5 FCS defensive classes. They have Xavier Gibson, who is an amazing weapon. They have Trey Self back there as quarterback. The thing that's hurt them this year is they haven't had a good running game, but they've also lost quite a few running backs to injury. They have to get these other intangibles down. They have to get their 2-minute, defensive drills down. They have to get off the field, and they have to be able to close out a game. And until they do that, they're not going to break from good to great.
Well, that's the tough thing about it is, as it keeps happening and they're on the losing end of it, like the confidence kind of starts to go down a little bit. So how do you build that? Confidence back up? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe the week off will give them a chance to kind of regroup and say, you know what, we're right there. One of these Saturdays or Fridays, or we're going to put it all together, and it's going to be – people are going to be like, this is the SFA team that we expected.
Yeah.
So just give it time. It's like my softball team. We're going to Worlds this weekend in Vegas. We've struggled at times in tournaments, but I know that I have a team that once we put it all together in that weekend, we're going to go win some ball games. So it's just sports are funny that way.
Yeah.
It's just sports are funny that way.
Yeah, I agree. And all right, Sam fans, I'm going back to you, so you can't call me a hater. One about this, granted, you did play Lamar, and Lamar is not good this year. Sorry, Cardinal fans, you're just not. But what's interesting to me is we talked about how potent the Sam defense was. I mean, they finished with 5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, and 2 picks. Insane against any sort of college program. I've said it on multiple podcasts. I said it yesterday on the FCS Fans Nation podcast that I was lucky enough to guest on. Sam Houston has the best front 7 in the FCS, and I will fight anybody who tries to tell me otherwise. The thing with Sam, what concerns me, and we can talk about this as we look at playoff implications, is right now they're getting pretty banged up. Eric Schmidt didn't play against SFA because he was on concussion protocols because he took a shot against UCA. When you watch the game against Lamar Jaquez Ezra, their future NFL player went out, I think right at the end of the first half and didn't play the second half. Now, granted, Sam has a lot of weapons on their team, because they have Adai as their other wide receiver. They have Smith, they have Ramon Jefferson, they have Cody Crest, the Harvard transfer who's come in, right? They have a ton of weapons. But I think the thing with Sam, and maybe taking a second bye week that they're taking this week is going to help them. They're going to have to stay healthy because as of right now, they and South Dakota State have played the most games in the past calendar year. And I wonder if we're starting to see some wear and tear because they're up to either 15 or 16 games in the past calendar year since spring of 2020. And I got to think that's starting to take a toll.
So 2 things with that. Like the first, I think, is the bye week comes at a great time because now you get to kind of rest up, get everybody healthy, you get to take basically a week off and make sure everybody gets that, the medical attention that they need and so forth and so on. I think the difference, though, with what you're saying, whether it's banged up or not, I mean, they know how to win. They've shown it. And I know that SFA fans will hate me for saying this, but because they know how to win, that's why they were able to finish off the SFA Battle of the Piney Woods the way that they did, is they know how to win, even with a backup quarterback. So in my mind, and I might get razzed for this, I'm a little bit of a BYU football fan. I like BYU football, okay? It's kind of been a next man up type of mentality. And that's the sign of good coaching, development, recruiting, whatever you want to call it. But because they know how to win, they don't care if somebody's injured or not. They go out and just do what they're supposed to do, and they win a ball game. And, people say, well, they only beat so-and-so by this much. They only beat so-and-so, but it's like, who cares? They continue to win games. And that's just quality right there of the coaching and the ability to just have players ready to play when they need to come in.
Oh, I'm not going to disagree with you there by any means. I will not disagree with you on just how the culture that Casey Keeler has put there, the next man up mentality that they have. He's built a winner. And the thing too is that, if you're a championship team, you find a way to win a game, whether you're without, your starting quarterback, whether you're without your star wide receiver, you as a team find a way to win a game. And that's what makes Sam absolutely dangerous as we go through the rest of the season, because the toughest opponent they have left on their schedule is next weekend. And it's is not this coming weekend, but next weekend, and it's Jacksonville State. And they get Jacksonville State at Bowers and Huntsville, which is a very tough place to come in as a visitor and win. And in fact, Sam Houston is undefeated in the playoffs in Bowers, right? So if it would surprise me if anybody manages to upend Sam, even with any injuries that they're coming across, because they are that cohesive of a team, because of the culture that's been built there. We'll talk more about this as we get to sort of playoff talk, but I mean, yeah, they're the cream of the crop in the WAC. They're going to be the cream of the crop in the WAC if they keep that culture.
Do you think that Sam Houston, and maybe someone on Twitter will answer this for us, when they see this episode, but do you think that with regard to Sam Houston, I mean, they got over the hump, they beat the rivals, SFA, in a close game where they were tested, and now maybe they're thinking, well, we're going to be on cruise control because we got over maybe our toughest test of the season. I'm not saying that they're going to take everybody lightly, but maybe now the pressure's off because they won that game when they were on the ropes. And let's be real, SFA fans, Sam Houston should have lost that game. But you know what I mean? Sometimes teams have that mentality where, when they're tested and they realize we won this game. We went out and we were tested and we won the game. And now, the pressure's off. Let's just go play our football, or, continue to compete at a high level and do what we do best. I don't know. I feel like as an athlete, growing up in sports and all, I've seen that before, where a team that has a target on its back, gets tested, and, comes close to losing for the first time in forever. I feel like that just kind of takes all the pressure off them when they realize, we're going to win games and we have that ability regardless of the circumstances.
I could see that, but I don't see that with Sam. And the reason why is they still don't have a guaranteed 1 or 2 seed.
True.
And I think you want that. You want December to go through your home stadium, because they want to say the road to Frisco goes through Huntsville, right? That's what they want to say. Just like Eastern Washington is going to want to say the road to Frisco goes through Cheney, right? So that's
Washington to play a playoff game. Ooh.
Yeah, but you're not going to let off the pedal, because I think we'll touch more on this later. But they're still not a guaranteed 1 or 2 seed. Their fans might think they are, but I think if you look at resumes, if you look at all those things right now they're not. They need some more teams to take a loss before they're that way, because there's still teams that are undefeated that have better strength of schedule, better resumes this year. then
before we get to that, I want to say that I am totally against analytics. I just want to say that for the people out there before we get to that, so you know where I'm coming from when we start talking about this stuff.
Yeah, let's real quick. Let's touch on the other game that happened last week. It was Eastern Kentucky versus Abilene Christian. Eastern Kentucky just came out and took Abilene Christian to the woodshed in the first half, and then basically laid off. I mean, it was 27-7 at the half. ACU did attempt a valiant comeback in the fourth quarter, but it absolutely was not enough. Parker McKinney for Eastern Kentucky, he shredded the Abilene Christian defense. Abilene Christian is still, they were still rebuilding that program. I think, given what the WAC is set up for, I think you'll see Abilene Christian vastly improve their program with recruiting. They had success at the D2 level. I think you'll see them get it back at the D1 level. Eastern Kentucky is kind of interesting, and we'll talk about this with the whole AQ7 piece, because right now they're currently the second place team in the AQ7. They're sitting at 4-2 after this, but they still haven't played the gauntlet of the AQ7 yet. So I think people are looking at that, and potentially if they're doing any sort of bracketology, they're already starting to pencil in EKU without looking at the remainder of the schedule. Because
how that works.
Yeah, because they still have to play. I mean, their last 3 games of the year are Stephen F. Austin, Sam Houston, Jacksonville State. They go to Nacogdoches. I think they go. I can't remember if they go. No, I think Sam Houston goes to them, and then I think they go to Jacksonville State to end the game. I could be wrong on that one. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but they've got a gauntlet to end their season, and they've got UCA this weekend as well. And UCA is, they're
Eastern Kentucky's going to lose. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I don't see them being second place team in the AQ7 after they get through that gauntlet. But
I want to say this though, unless they change their philosophy, okay? I hate this about college football and the NFL. All right, they were up 20? It was 27-7 in the first half at halftime, right?
Yeah.
Why in the world do you take the foot off the pedal? Why don't you score 40+ points and whoop on somebody? It drives me nuts in college football to see that. Like, some teams are good about keeping the foot on, but I mean, it's just like you can't win a game ugly like that. What was it? It was 30-15 is what the final score ended up being.
Yeah.
That's ugly. Like, go score 27 more points in the second half.
Well, it's funny how games like that kind of happened this year, and some of them came back this season, or even this past weekend. Because if you look at not a WAC game, but look at James Madison and Villanova. James Madison was up on Villanova, and then James Madison was shut out in the second half.
Well, right? And on the FBS side, Texas, was up 28-7 and ended up losing that game.
But any given Saturday, anything can happen, and that's the great thing about college football. I didn't put together really the graphic for the WAC Power Poll, but it didn't shift in any means. It's still Sam, SFA, Abilene Christian, Tarleton, Dixie State, and Lamar. There's not movement there, and there's probably not going to be until you see Abilene Christian pull an upset against somebody, or if you see, maybe you might see Tarleton and Dixie State flip basis. The game this weekend, right? Yeah. Right now it's kind of stagnant because the only teams that have played each other right now head to head are Abilene Christian and Lamar, and Sam and SFA. And Abilene Christian obviously took Lamar to woodshed the first time they played, and we've already touched enough.
State hasn't played Lamar yet, right?
No,
that'll be an interesting game.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
They don't play.
No, I don't think they do.
Lamar and Dixie State don't play this year.
No, and it's weird because Abilene Christian and Lamar are playing twice, and that was a game they could have gotten. And I also did forget to mention that SFA did play Tarleton and won 20-10 week 1.
Yeah, so that's sad. I would have liked to seen that because the battle for I don't know, maybe Dixie State will pull one out this weekend against Tarleton at home. Well, and I don't want to rip on Dixie State because they're Utah schools, so I'm root for the Utah schools and. Anyways.
Well, since we're here, let's talk about the games that are upcoming this week because there's only 2 within the WAC. We said Lamar. Now Lamar is doing the return leg of this trip. A few weeks ago, Abilene Christian went to Beaumont and played, and like we said, beat them 56-0. This is the second. For some reason, they have 2 games against each other, so this is the second round. I think this is the one that actually counts to conference standings. I don't know if the other one does, but But Abilene Christian, you've got to think at home, they're going to be a favorite to win this one against Lamar. Lamar just doesn't have the offense, doesn't have the defense. Yeah, they pulled it. They had a great overtime win against Northern Colorado, but Northern Colorado is not that great of a Big Sky school. Lamar is still rebuilding. They do have some great recruits. They do have a rated 5-star kicker on their team that they recruited. I just think they need a few more years to recruit. And I think too, now that they're going into the WAC, they can recruit against schools like McNeese and the Louisiana schools by saying, hey, we're not in the Southland anymore. We're in the WAC. We're in a big, we're in this new conference. I think there's better recruiting opportunities for the Cardinals. But honestly, this game is probably going to get ugly quickly. You're probably going to see the second stringers come in at half again, because I can't see this one.
The worst part is we're saying this, and watch, Lamar's going to come and do something crazy, or Abilene Christian's not going to take him serious, and it's going to be a closer game than we think. But yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think there's enough offense right now with Lamar, and it's going to be the same in the next game that we talk about a little bit. But I can't remember what Lamar game it was that I turned on. Maybe it was the Sam Houston Lamar game. They've played already, right?
Yeah, they played this past weekend. So
I don't have the words for it. I just think Abilene Christian, they've already whooped them once. Let's be honest, the word "whooped" is legit in this situation. And being at home, I don't see it happening any other way. So
yeah, no, I can't see it either. Especially, I think Abilene Christian's going to be mad after the loss to Eastern Kentucky.
That Abilene Christian had almost as many punting yards as they did total offensive yards.
Yeah,
I forgot to spark something in a team and be like, guys, this is an awful stat. We got to change this. Imagine if they turned that 243 punting yards into total yards offensively, that would have been a different game. So,
well, the thing is, they have a good quarterback in Stone Earl. I like Stone Earl. I think that he's got a lot of talent. He's also young too. He's a redshirt freshman, and you're going to watch him grow. You're going to see him take the sort of same path that Trey Selford's taken with Stephen F. Austin. You're going to see him grow, and I think that's what you give it a couple of years. You're going to see Abilene Christian moving up in the WAC, and I think they'll compete with Stephen F. Austin. I don't know if they'll win. I don't know if they'll win against Stan, but I think you'll see them solidify themselves into that third position, right? And they'll put a gap between Tarleton and Dixie and Lamar. And that's not a slight against Tarleton, because Tarleton was a D2 powerhouse. But, they still are going to come in. They still transition in. It's not easy to recruit during that transition. So I think you might see a gap form between those. But that's going to be a really good rivalry too, because those schools are so close to each other, and it was an old D2 rivalry. So I can't wait to watch that one get renewed.
And it's the battle of the purple and white.
Well, plenty of purple and white in the conference now, where we added. The other game is the battle of the transitional teams as the Tarleton State Texans travel to St. George to play the Dixie State, soon to be Utah Tech, I believe, Trailblazers. And the interesting fact about this is that these two teams played each other twice in the spring last year, and the visiting team won each game.
Don't think it's happening this week.
I don't think it's happening this year either. I think Tarleton's got too much of an offense, and Dixie State doesn't have an offense.
No, I'm going against that one. I think Dixie State comes out firing in this one. I think head coach Paul Peterson figures it out. The offense gets rolling. They're playing at home. They've had a brutal first 5 games. I mean, they played, 3 of the top 10 FCS schools in the nation. They just got done playing Montana.
They played South Dakota State the week before.
South Dakota State, and
they played Weber State. Weber
State, that's right. So, they're battle tested. Now they get to play at home in front of their home fans. I think the Trailblazers pull off the upset this weekend. It's not really an upset. I don't know. Is it an upset?
It's upset. It's an upset. It's an upset.
Pull off the upset. I don't know if it'll be high scoring, maybe a 27-21 type game, but I just think that the Trailblazers now playing at home, they get a chance to kind of relax, sleep in their own beds, prep fully without having to worry about travel, and I think they take care of business at home. And the fans of St. George, in St. George. They need it, so get it done. And nothing against Tarleton State. I just think that there's a lot more on the line for Dixie State this weekend than there is for Tarleton.
See, I think Tarleton has the better team. But there are those intangibles like being at home finally after being on the road and just getting pounded by teams. Although, like I said, they first quarter against Montana, their defense looked really good, but their offense has got to put some points on the board, and that's just the thing. I feel like they just don't have that offensive oomph yet. And Tarleton's got a decent defense. They're not world beaters, but they come to play. It'll be a fun one to watch. I look forward to watching it. I think it's going to be a much better game to watch than Abilene Christian.
It'll be very entertaining, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Very entertaining.
Definitely. Well, the last thing I want to talk about is playoffs, because I put something on Twitter, and you mentioned to me that you want to talk about this. So I want to talk about playoffs and playoff resumes, because I put up a thing that said, okay, let's look at these two teams. Team A is undefeated right now. They're 6-0. They have an FBS win. They have a top 5. Well, the team at the time was a top 5 FCS ranked win, and they play in a very, very very tough conference. Right? Team B, undefeated. They have a weaker strength of schedule. They do have 2 wins against teams that were technically ranked in the top 25 at the time that they played, but their out of conference wins are against teams that weren't ranked in the FCS poll, and some of them were I would say are considered lower bottom feeders of their conference. However, one of the teams that they did beat did turn around and beat a Pac-12 FBS opponent, but that Pac-12 team is not a solid football playing team. I mean, granted, any FBS win over a power conference school is a great win, and I'm not going to take anything away from that win for that team. But when you look at these two resumes, who do you give the number 1 seed to? Team A or Team B?
Teams you're talking about now.
Team A is Eastern Washington, and Team B is Sam Houston.
Okay, so now I do. That's what I thought. I think I put it down here. Who did Eastern Washington beat?
They beat Eastern.
They beat UNLV.
They beat, and then they beat Montana which was on ESPN2, and they beat Montana 34-28.
Okay, so here's a question I'm going to throw out there, and it's not about it's kind of tied to it, but I want you to think about this. Let's say that Alabama wins a national title last year. They haven't lost in. They didn't lose all last season. Do you rank, and they're 5-0 or whatever this year. They've played some of the bottom feeders in the SEC. And not that this is true. I'm just saying let's hypothetically. They played 3 teams that are in the bottom of the SEC. They played, let's say, Miami to start the season, who was ranked but dropped out and is like 2-4 on the season. And then, they played some podunk, smaller school and whooped them like 63-0. Do you think that, let's say, an Ohio State who lost in the college football playoff, not in the championship game, but the college football playoff, is undefeated this year, has wins over, I don't know, let's say Iowa, Penn State, Indiana, and 2 other FBS schools. Do you think that Ohio State, who's had a loss recently, should be number 1 over Alabama, who hasn't lost, simply because maybe they've played a better schedule this season so far?
So to answer that question, I'm going to give you another question. At what point does the previous year stop counting? Because if you look, so right now, I'm obviously halfway through the season. It's really too early to even do playoff seedings, right? But it's a fun thing. It's like doing a poll week 1, right? Doing a poll week 1 is absolutely stupid, because you're basically basing it off the previous year. But now in FCS, we've got 6 weeks in to the season. It's time to stop giving them the benefit of the previous year. I know Sam Houston won the national championship. I know they bring back 98% of that team. But also, there's also things from the spring season that could be considered. Would they have won if Gronowski hadn't got injured in the national championship? I mean, they only managed to beat South Dakota State by 3, and South Dakota State didn't have a quarterback, right? They had to depend on their running game because their backup quarterback was so bad that he's not the starter this year. They brought in Oladukin from Stanford as a transfer to start for them. There were some drives about if Trey Lance had played a spring season for North Dakota State instead of them using Zeb Nolan as their quarterback when North Dakota State had been a better team. There's a lot of different intangibles there, but the big thing to go back to with this is if you look at this season, if Sam Houston hadn't won the national championship in 2020 and you looked at, or 2020, whatever it is, then you look at their record this season and their resume, would you justify ranking them number one over Eastern Washington, over North Dakota State, over even Southern Illinois right now, who are all undefeated teams who have all played tougher schedules?
Probably not.
That's the problem. They're getting the benefit of the previous year.
Play though, because we're saying, well, what if SDSU had this player or that player? But the thing is, here's the thing, okay? Until somebody knocks the king of the hill off the hill, they're the king of the hill. Like, plain and simple.
But that's not going to apply to seedings, though. That'll apply to polls.
I know it won't. That's where I said I hate analytics. Like, I hate them. But until somebody knocks the king off the hill, in my mind, I'm old school like this. Okay, guys, I'm old school. Until you get knocked off, you're the number one team. Period. Like, it's not Sam Houston's fault that they can't play Eastern Washington right now, or they can't play South Dakota State, or they can't go play. Maybe an FBS school didn't want to play them this year.
Well, I mean, they did a tactic that I think helps them in terms of their health, but hurts them in terms of their resume because they took 2 bye weeks. They only had 10 games this year, right? And they scheduled, they had their opener against Northern Arizona, which they won handily, which they should have done, right? They should have done, and they beat Southeastern Missouri and Huntsville, which they should have done. Those are things absolutely should have done. But that extra bye week, while like I said, it's probably great for the players because they played the most amount of games in a calendar year that I've seen in a long time for if ever for a college team. That hurts their resume. I'm not
disagreeing with you on that. I want to make,
and I think they could have probably found a game. They could have found, and it may not have been an Eastern Washington. It may not have been a Montana because that's a conference game, right? And it may not have been, but they could have padded it with a decent mid-level sort of team to get in there. They probably could have gotten. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say probably. They could have looked at someone like Kennesaw State. They could have looked at someone like Southern Illinois and tried to get a game there. But instead, they took the extra bye. And for their players, that was probably the best move to do because I think you're starting to see those teams that went longer in the spring start to wear down just a little bit.
And that's what I'm saying. Go ahead. So.
Go ahead. So when we get to playoff seeding time, when the committee gets together, they're not going to look. They're going to look at the polls, but they're going to look at the strength of schedule, and they're going to look and they're going to see that Eastern Washington, Montana, either even right if the season were to end today, okay, they would look right then, and they would see that there's multiple teams that have a better resume in terms of strength of schedule and teams they played than Sam Houston. And it's not Sam Houston's fault that the rest of the AQ7 has decided to basically snatch defeat from the jaws of victory and basically spontaneous combust as a conference. But I don't think it's gonna help Sam get a seed. I don't think they'd get a number one. I think they could probably argue for a number 2 seed. But if at the moment, or if Eastern Washington and North Dakota State run their gauntlet and win out, it's really hard to justify Sam getting a number 1 seed over them, especially because North Dakota State will have beat South Dakota State in the marker game. And then they're going to have wins over UNI. They're going to have wins over North Dakota, who are all ranked teams. Eastern Washington's going to have wins over, if they run through the gauntlet, over wins over Montana State, right? Like, they're going to have that resume building type thing. And Sam fans, like, I'm not trying to hate on y'all here because if the playoff, if you get a 1 or 2 seed and the playoff runs through Bowers, I would easily bet the house on y'all being in Frisco because winning at home is what y'all do. And if you have to go on the road as a 3 seed, I still would give you guys a good chance of being in Frisco because you're that good of a team. But I don't think that when it's time to do seedings, the committee is going to look at the schedule this year and go, wow, they deserve a higher seed than an undefeated North Dakota State or undefeated Eastern Washington. And that's assuming everybody runs the board, right? I just don't see the committee doing that.
Well, and that's why I made my disclaimer very clear before we got to this point that I hate analytics. Like I absolutely hate it because and like you said, they're playing fewer games, understandable, because they've played the most games out of most FCS schools in the last 9 months. Like we can't deny that, or not even 9 months. It's been what, 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so yeah, take an extra week to get healthy and to get right and to make sure everybody's in good shape and ready to go down the stretch. I mean, because you're going to be playing a lot of football. But I just hate that notion that, well, because this team didn't play anybody, we're going to knock them off from their perch, even though they're still undefeated and they haven't lost anybody. I know that's not the norm nowadays in sports. I get it. I totally understand it. But it's so hard for me to not accept it. I understand that Eastern Washington has that opportunity to play Montana and Montana State because they're in the same conference. I get it. I get that South Dakota State and North Dakota State will play each other because they're in the same conference. That's the unfortunate part about the conference right now in the WAC is that really you don't have that second team or that third team that's up there in the top 15, top 10. Like I want to say at Jacksonville State with that A-Sun thing, so that Sam Houston gets to play that team, or SFA, who's winning all their other games besides the one against Sam Houston. Like somebody in the WAC has to do that. You know, the sad thing, Dustin, is we're going to be saying the same thing about basketball. Like when basketball season rolls around, we're going to be saying the same thing that, you know, whether it's New Mexico State or SFA or Grand Canyon or Utah Valley or whoever, somebody has to win those other games. Like somebody has to win the majority of their non-conference slate to make it so that happens when those two teams meet. Like, here we go. Here are two top 15 teams going at it so that this matters.
Yeah.
And this has an impact down the road. And I mean, that's the unfortunate part that Sam Houston's in is they don't have that feature game really that they could woo the voters or woo the numbers or the computers or whatever to put them in that one seed.
Well, they didn't get it. And part of it is because of what the AQ7 is doing to basically combust around Sam Houston. Now, if you look at Stephen F. Austin, if you look at their out-of-conference schedule, they played Tarleton, they played Mississippi Valley, and they played Lincoln, who was a new program, right? So they're and then they had the game where they almost beat Texas Tech, right? Their out-of-conference schedule doesn't help Sam because it doesn't really give Sam, I would say, like a marquee win, even though Stephen F. Austin was ranked at the time. Had they probably played a tougher out-of-conference schedule in one of those games, it would have been ranked higher in the poll, right? UCA, you know, Sam Houston played them. That was a fun game to watch. But UCA, they lost to Missouri State. They lost to Arkansas State. They got a win over Arkansas Pine Bluff, who were the, I think, spring SWAC champions or SWAC West champions. But then that win kind of got negated because the next week, UAPB basically had a meltdown against Alcorn State and lost in the second half of that game. It's, you know, and when we look at what's left with the AQ7, because, you know, it is, for those who don't know, it is, you know, SFA, Sam, Lamar, Abilene Christian, Central Arkansas, Eastern Kentucky, Jacksonville State, right? Those teams, the A-Sun, who's becoming a new football conference, and their schools, and the WAC, they united for one season as a conference to make sure there was one auto qualifying bid, right? And right now it's Sam's. Unless something happens, Sam is going to take that auto qualifying bid. But if you look at the rest of the conference, the teams who should be in second place are somehow finding a way to get themselves out of second place.
Lose games, yeah.
The lose games
they shouldn't be.
Stephen F. Austin lost to Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State is the biggest Jekyll and Hyde team in the conference. You know, they beat Florida State, a very down Florida State, but still a win over a Power 5 program is a win over a Power 5 program. And then they turn around and lose to UT Martin. They get absolutely destroyed by Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State ran their triple option all over them, right? But then they somehow turn around and beat SFA. So, and then Jacksonville State is playing Sam not this coming weekend, but the next weekend. And then I think they play Central Arkansas after that, right? If they lose one of those games, they're going to be a 7-4 team at best, and they're probably going to have their playoff hopes dashed. They won't get a at-large bid. If SFA were to run the rest of their schedule, they finish at 8-3, but they would still, that loss to Sam doesn't hurt them as much as that loss to Jacksonville State would hurt them, and they would still be an outlier for at-large bid. Central Arkansas, if they ran the slate, they would be 8-3, and I think they would probably have an argument of getting in at-large bid because their losses weren't necessarily that bad of losses. Although it kind of depends on where Missouri State finishes out, because I think they're about to get knocked out of the top 25 if they already haven't. And then you look at Eastern Kentucky, who right now is 4-2. When you look at the standings for the AQ7, they're in second, but they still have not played Jacksonville State. They still have not played UNF Austin. They have not played Sam Houston, and they're playing Central Arkansas finally this weekend. You're going to see them become a 6-5 or 5-6 team. So it goes back to your point. The three schools that should have been the marquee wins for Sam are finding ways to not be the marquee wins for Sam, and that hurts Sam, and it's not fair to Sam. But when you look at the schedule in a normal year, that's why you got to try to schedule, if you want to, you don't want to schedule yourself out of the playoffs. And we've seen that happen with schools before. We've seen back in the day, like a 9-2 Lehigh not get into the playoffs because they didn't win the conference. I think it happened to McNeese State one year as well, too. Even though they had like a 9-2 record or 8-3 record, they didn't win the Southland auto qualifier. They didn't get an at-large bid into the playoffs. And when you talk about the analytics, I can tell you it's frustrating as a SFA alumni, and I'm going to put my bias here real quick. It was in 2010, SFA was ranked second in the nation. Second in the nation. We did not get a seed. We had to play against Villanova, and Villanova absolutely destroyed us. And so, again, it kind of goes back to that thing, is that they have to use some of this analytics to look at, because, yes, you could be the number one team, but you could also be a paper tiger this year. And that's not a dig at Sam Houston by any means, but that's just the means behind it. Again, like I said, if Sam gets a 1 or 2 seed, they're going to be playing in Frisco. If they get a 3 seed, they're probably still going to be playing in Frisco, because I think they could potentially beat a team like North Dakota State and Eastern Washington if they had to travel to them. But the difference is you're going to play in the Fargo Dome, and the Fargo Dome is just as hard of a place to win in. Or you're going to play on the Inferno in December, and that's just as hard to win. So it'll be interesting. There was a lot of chaos this week in the FCS with teams losing, with South Dakota State losing in overtime to Southern Illinois. And Southern Illinois is a much better team than anybody is giving them credit for this year. They have taken that. They have basically built from the ground up. And, last year they were a playoff team. They almost beat South Dakota State in the playoffs. They're good. Villanova is back to being good too. They beat James Madison. So you're seeing these shakeups at the top that are going to happen as the big three conferences play each other. And it'll be interesting to see if Eastern Washington can run the gauntlet undefeated, and if North Dakota State can run the gauntlet undefeated and get the marker back, as South Dakota State has it. And then what happens with Sam? So if I'm a Sam fan, I'm watching those two teams closely each weekend and seeing what happens with their games, because because it's just going to be interesting to see when it gets to the end what the committee looks at.
Well, and the thing is, too, for Sam Houston, you have to win every game from here on out convincingly, like you did against Lamar. I'm not lying about that. Like, these are games that you're going to be expected to win. So you have to win handily to make it even more impressive to the committee. And I'm not saying that they're going to overjump on Eastern Washington or North Dakota State or whoever wins those conferences, but do what you're supposed to do and win those games the way you're supposed to win them. It might be impressive, because then the committee can say, well, they did exactly what they're supposed to do. And I don't know. It's
if they blow out Jacksonville
analytics.
Well, if they blow out Jacksonville State, which is a very distinct possibility, I think that's going to help them more than hurt them. I think they're going to look at that and say, wow, Jacksonville State at the time was ranked, because they're still getting votes in the top 25 for some reason. They're going to look at that as, hey, we beat a ranked team. And I honestly think Sam Houston could beat them by 20 or 30 points. Right. So that would be something that would help them. But then after that, they kind of go. They're playing Abilene Christian. They're playing, Eastern Kentucky. They're getting into the softer part of their schedule, right?
Dixon and Tarleton, I believe, too.
Yeah, so they're getting into the softer part of their schedule, and so they really, really need to come out and just absolutely take Jacksonville State to the woodshed. And it's something that team is capable of doing, because they are that good. Just from a personal, not an SFA fan standpoint, if I look at I agree with the move to take the bye because to get the second bye because if you look at it, they're getting banged up. Schmidt had, like I said, he missed the SFA game because of concussion protocol. Jaquez Ezard was injured, right? And you don't want to lose your star. So I think from a health standpoint, Casey Keeler, they made the right choice in doing that. That said, I hope that move doesn't bite them in the rear when it comes to the committee looking at resumes.
Absolutely.
So, man, this has been good. We're about 50 minutes in. I think we've hit every topic. Also, not bad for your first recap.
Minutes longer than we should have.
That's all right. It's fun conversation. Kyle, do you have anything you want to add before we get on?
No, guys, I may not have sounded real well versed in this first episode that I was with Dustin here on, but believe you me, I will be paying attention more and more as we go along, and excited to talk football. And I mean, if you haven't followed me on WAC Hoops Digest, we also cover basketball. WAC Media Days for Hoops is next week. So a lot of content on WACHoopsDigest.com. And like I said, we're rebranding, so give us a follow. You won't want to miss it. And looking forward to more football. It's a great time of year, to be honest.
Oh yeah, and WAC football is back. You know what? I don't care what anybody says. It's back. It's one of the things that I want to see. I like the WAC when it was FBS. I'm glad to be part of it now. So, guys, we're going to let you go. Thanks for listening. Remember, this is part of the FCS Fans Nation podcast network. So you're on the YouTube page for FCS Fans Nation. If you haven't given a like and subscribe, do that at the bottom. Support them because there's so much other great content. You can see podcasts from Jacksonville State, from around the A-Sun. You can see the Eagles Power Hour about Eastern Washington. You can see the Jackrabbit Illustrated and the B-Team Boys with my boy Brendan. He gave us a shout out on his podcast a few weeks ago, so I'm giving him one back. The B-Team, Brendan and Ben, man, they take care of it when it comes to Jackrabbit. The Jackrabbit football, they were my spring team. I like South Dakota State. Might be the whole Lumberjacks and Jackrabbit type, Jack sort of thing, but still go for them. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. We will catch you next week. Have a great week and go WAC football.